I'll now turn the webinar over to Dr. Wayman. Dr. Wayman, welcome.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you for everybody out there in internet land who's tuning in. I'm pretty excited about this. I was telling the CETL staff before we started that I'm as excited about this as anything I've talked about in a while. I like the application of what we're going to talk about today. It's not something that we have been learning a lot about in the research, and so I think this is new stuff that's that can do us all a lot of good. I want to draw your attention to something first to start with on this opening slide. Right there in the middle are some ways you can get in touch with me through email, website, and Twitter. Feel free to mail me questions as you get them along, or tweet them out to me or something, not just during the webinar here, but ongoing. I'm always happy to engage in conversation about this. I'll also draw your attention to my website there, waymandatause.com. I'm fairly new into the consultant world as a reformed professor, and I'm in the process of building this website out. What I'm hoping this becomes is a resource for people who are wondering about data use issues. Right now, what's up there is a blog that I started recently. I've had 3 or 4 entries in it, so you may find that interesting. And also, you may find interesting the publications section. In the publications section, I've got pretty much everything that I've ever written about data use in terms of published research. And so, if you want to go read some of my research, if you're having trouble sleeping or whatever, then go to that website, click on the publications part, and you can see what we are about. So today's webinar is really arises out of work that I've been conducting for probably the last, I don't know, the last 6 years. Actually, I've been researching data systems since 2003 when I was at Johns Hopkins working with Sam Stringfield. It's interesting, in 2003, our message at the time was, this is easier than you think, because at the time, nobody had really thought about collecting data into a data system and turning it loose on teachers and principals and educators. And when we would talk about getting data to people, then people would think, oh my gosh, that sounds hard. And our message was, no, there are these things called data systems that you haven't seen yet, but they're really cool, and they deliver data to people, and it's really fairly easy. Well, okay, flash forward 11 years, and my message has become, this is harder than you think, because technology has taken over, and the attitude in the field right now is an implicit one of that the technology will solve this. And whether it's at South by Southwest Edu, AERA, or whatever conferences, when we hear about data systems, we often hear that they are going to help us do these things in great fashion. And my message now is, this is harder than you think it is, because there are people issues that we have to take care of. So I mentioned that we've been doing some research around this. We started really looking hard at this area that I'm going to talk to you about, the human side, in 2008. And that was when Vincent Cho and Shanna Shaw and I were doing an evaluation of a data system in Mesa Public Schools. I continued it on with Vin and Jo Beth Jimerson in the work that we did at the University of Texas as a research team. And so what you're going to see today is really I would say a culmination, but it's not a culmination because it's always ongoing. But you're going to see a milepost in this research that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, and learning about how people use data systems and reading research from outside of the field of education and conducting our own research. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get rolling here. Bear with us just a second. We're having technical difficulties. It's probably a hardware error between the chair and the keyboard. But anyway, we're on to the next slide. Why do we need this webinar? Well, the deal is that there is a lot of money being spent on data systems. Hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on data systems because everybody recognizes the need for technology. The problem is that our research and that of others shows that use is not commensurate with spending. Don't get me wrong, I think data systems are a lot of bang for the buck, but if they go unused, or if they only get used occasionally, they're an expensive tool. So we've started looking into why this may be, and our own research and that in ed tech suggests that the implementation practices may be oversimplified. That is, implementation practices in today's schools and districts typically focus on the technology, on implementing the technology and showing people how to use the technology, and it is good, right? Well, the issue is that technology is never the agent for change. I shouldn't say never. Technology is hardly ever the agent for change. The agency for change lies in people, and that is often ignored or largely ignored in implementation. And so what we get is a field right now where our technology is pretty good. We have a problem in terms of data systems, but we haven't done much for the problem in terms of the human side. And that is what we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to start with is we're going to first define some perspectives on data use. We'll get on the same page. After we work to get on the same page, I'm going to review the typical implementations that we've seen in schools and districts and talk a little bit about why those happen as they do. Then I will identify some characteristics of the human side of people issues that we need to be paying attention to. And finally, we're going to spend the last part of the webinar on an actual implementation plan. So I think you'll want to stick around for that. So let's get on the same page here. First of all, wait, did I miss a slide? Yeah, sorry, I skipped over a slide. First of all, let's talk about what our purpose is for data use. One of the things that I found in data use is that the purpose that you're using data for affects what are good practices. And understand that there are a lot of different purposes you can have for data use. You can use data for accountability. You can use it for staffing. You can use it for HR, for financial, for doing things with students, both in terms of sorting, grouping, and frequent examination of their student needs. There are myriad uses and purposes for data. What I want you to know is that today's focus, so the answer to data use for what? For today is instructional improvement. That's what we're going to be talking about today, is data use for instructional improvement. We need to define what we mean by data. Now, when data come into the conversation worldwide, what people often take it as is formal assessments. And so those first three bullets on the left there are what most people think of as data. So you've got your state assessments. My daughter today is taking the STAR test here in Texas, and people think, oh, that's data. Well, yeah, that's one form of data. Formative assessments are another form of data. Local assessments are another form of data. There are so many different forms of data in my definition because I define data as anything that helps educators know more about their students. So that includes grades, quizzes, parental information, teacher observation, work samples, all sorts of different things. So I want you to know we're casting a wide net about student data. We are talking about assessment, but we're not only talking about assessment. We're talking about a lot of things. Finally, I want to let you know of my perspective on this. I look at this through a lens of a thing I've been working on called the data-informed district. This is a systemic framework that takes the approach that data are not used in islands or pockets or whatever. That if we're going to use data, we should do it throughout a district. It should look the same or at least recognizable from one context to the next within our district. And we should use it in a way to inform our practice. So a really important thing about the data-informed district is that data are used in the course of everyday work, not in addition to everyday work. So I'm not looking to do data in a way that adds a weekend to what a teacher has to do, that makes the principal work on this during their lunch hour. I'm looking for ways to infuse it into their everyday work, so it's part of what they're doing as their job. In the data-informed district, uses of data are characterized by alignment, so the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. Integration, so that our supports are district-wide. Collaboration, we all work together. However important we think collaboration is right now. It's more important, is what I've learned. In the data-informed district, we set up structures, we set up routines, we set up processes, we set up habits. Some of them are formal, some of them are not. But we don't just sit down and say, hey, I'm going to implement a data culture. No, what we do is we put processes and habits in place, and then we look around one day and we say, oh, because of these structures we put in place, we have a data using culture that's part of our everyday work. Finally, I'll say, data don't drive nothing. It's not data that do the driving. It's professional judgment. Data inform things. Data inform professional judgment. Professional judgment is still the most valuable tool. It's the most valuable resource that we have in a district. Data only inform that. And so in my work and in today's talk, you won't hear me say the term data-driven. You'll hear me say data-informed and data-based. So that gets us on the same page. Let's move to talking a little bit about what a typical implementation might look like in a school or a school district of a computer data system. Typical implementation from the research that we've done, from the research that other people have done, and also from millions of hours of sitting, talking to teachers, talking to implementers, talking to superintendents, and learning anecdotally about how these things are going in districts. And I can tell you, your mileage may vary, but the implementation of these systems across contexts, across the nation, looks remarkably similar. I'm not saying that everything is exactly like this, but I think you'll see a lot of yourself if you do any work in this area in what I'm about to say. So, in typical implementations, the process is often focused on the technical part. That is, it's focused on the system and the system features. Now, we have to have this, right? I mean, the system has to work. And so we do have to, especially up front, we've got to know things like how fast is it? Can it turn the data around quickly, or do we sit there and watch the pinwheel of death for a while? What data are in there? Are they the data that I need? Are they the data that you need? Is everybody going to be served by this? Does it work? I mean, when I click this, do I actually get the data that I want? These are all super important things that we have to do. This goes back to the way that we buy or build data systems, what we call procurement, because procurement is often around the technical pieces. What reports do we want in here? And how is this going to work? This procurement process and then subsequently the implementation process is typically planned and led by a small group of people. Sometimes that small group number is one champion who takes care of buying the system, deciding what we're going to have in it, how it's going to work, where it's going to be rolled out, when it's going to be rolled out, and all those things. We see a lot of instances where this planning is done by a steering committee. But still, this is a relatively small group of people. And in fact, from start to finish, this procurement and implementation process, I see often is dependent a lot on vendor presentations. Not just the brochure, oh, I looked at this brochure and it looks great, but the vendor comes in and works with schools and districts and shows them what the system will do, off and off of a demo site, and describes the functionalities of the system. And my sense is that vendors are typically very upfront about what their systems will and won't do. But this is a large source of knowledge for implementation teams as they go forward. So those take care of the rollout part. They're building in the preparation for rollout. This continues on, this focus on the system continues on through rollout. That is, when we roll the system out, it's rolled out or introduced to our people through training sessions. And so we take this system that we've built that works and we show people how to use it. And we go through the various system functions. Often vendors provide Often vendors will provide training. They'll send an expert out to train your people on how to use the system. And this is how we familiarize our people with system functions. So we have a data system now that we've built or we've bought. We've put it in place. We're very proud of it. And we taught people how to use it. This makes sense, right? I mean, the data system worked. We taught everybody how to use it. Why isn't anybody using it? We had a plan, and our plan worked, but why isn't anybody using it? The research that we have shows that this is fairly typical, and that we do get some use. I'm going to talk about that more here in a little bit. But as I said, it's not commensurate with the resources that we put into it, both in terms of the money and in terms of energy that we put in. So we're going to move on to a chat pod discussion. And there are going to be a couple of things that are going to happen here. First, you're going to see a poll. Okay, what this poll is going to do is ask you to respond, just check a box and tell us how this first part of the webinar sounded in terms of the context of your work. I know that some of you are in schools, some of you are in districts, and some of you are in organizations or universities that for some reason work with schools or districts. I want to know how much of this rang true. How much of it are you like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. You'll be able to respond to that. The second part of it, so we'll give you about probably a minute or two to respond to the poll, and it's very cool. You'll see real-time data up there, so you'll see these things changing as people vote. So it wouldn't be a data webcast without some real-time data, right? After a little bit, that will disappear, like maybe a minute or so. That will go away, and there are going to be a couple of chat pods that come up. And there are going to be two opportunities to participate. One of them is to share examples from your own context. Your school or district, schools or district that you've worked with, research that you've read, and say, oh yeah, I saw what he was talking about, and it looked like this in my context. I'd also like you to share what kind of outcomes you've seen. Have you seen this happening, and it worked? Have you seen this happening and it didn't work? Have you seen this happening and there's a hybrid? Some stuff worked and some stuff didn't. And so we'd like for you all to interact with each other around these, and we will keep an eye on it. We'll let you all work on this for 6 to 8 minutes. It's 2:25 Central Time right now, and so we will start to reconvene in about 6 minutes at around 2:31 or 2:32 Central Time, and we'll discuss whatever needs discussing there, and then we will get back to our webinar. Okay, everybody, I'm back. I love the discussion that we saw here. You guys are awesome. Really, really interesting things that came through there, and so thank you for that. I'll react to. Well, let me say this first: that after we go back to the PowerPoint, there will be an area there where you can put in questions as they come up. So feel free to do that. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to get to them, but I will try. So you can see the poll back up there. It looks like most of you thought it was familiar. I could tell by the discussion that many of you are living this right now. You know, I saw a few themes that I thought were interesting. One of them was a sense of frustration, either from you all or from the people that you work with, where it's like, you know what, this is just dang hard to do. One source of that frustration was a common thing that I saw, which is something that I hear in almost every focus group that I do, which is somebody says, we've got all these data, now what do we do with them? You know, somebody in the discussion made the point that data are just data, but it takes the educator to figure out what to do with them. And the data system provides the former, the data, but not what to do with it. I also saw a real interesting discussion about vendors and their role. And I encourage everybody to keep that line of communication going. You know, I was at a workshop once where we brought vendors and district people together. And it was, in fact, I used to do this in my classes at the University of Texas. I would have an expert day where I would bring in people from the vendor side and people from the district side, and they would talk about their various needs. And it's really interesting to hear the vendors talk about what they need from schools. I hear a lot about what schools need from vendors, but hear the vendors talk about what they need from schools is interesting. And there, you can sum it up by saying that vendors need schools and districts to be more clear about what they need in a data system. So I like that discussion also. Anyway, let's get our PowerPoint back up. As I said, feel free to ask questions. But let's move on to the next part of our discussion, which is about what sorts of things are underlying a typical implementation. So I talked about the typical implementation, and it turns out that research that we've conducted from outside of the field of education tells us something about this. So a lot of this is work that Vincent Cho did in his dissertation and in a couple of articles that Vin and I have published on it, and in fact an AERA paper coming up. We've looked not just in the field of data use, but also in ed tech, in systems research, in knowledge management, and there are some assumptions and underlying themes to this typical implementation that I want to talk to you a little bit about. One of them is that the implementation, like we just discussed, has an implicit assumption that goes along with it, that providing a data system is about giving the right tools for the job. That is, that we as the data champion, or we as the data committee, or whoever we as the implementation planners are, we've looked at the data system, we've decided the things that we need to know, and we've decided the things that people will need, and we have created a data system to do that. The research tells us that that approach works well whenever things are predictable, like in a factory or an assembly line or something, where you know that that this one input will bring this outcome. Research also shows that it doesn't work as well in contexts where you use a lot of professional judgment, like teaching, like education. And that's because professional judgment is influenced by so many different things. It's influenced by your background, it's influenced by your training, it's influenced by your experience, it's influenced by politics, it's influenced by a lot of different things, and there are infinite combinations of this, and consequently, professional or contexts where professional judgment is required are fairly unpredictable. Not unpredictable like crazy, but unpredictable in that there are going to be a lot of things that came up that you didn't think about whenever you built this system and gave them the right tools for the job. Another thing that underlies these typical implementations is that there is an assumption made, often an implicit assumption, but the assumption is made that when you stop your implementation at initial training, which is where almost all of them stop. So we built this data system, we showed everybody how to use it, now we're done with implementation. When you stop there, you've made an assumption that use beyond that training is now obvious. So we showed everybody how to use it, now go use it. And here is where the things came up in the discussion that were problematic when in those chat pods that you guys are filling in. This is where your users are telling you, hey, I got the data, but I don't know what to do with it. Because there was an assumption made that, that the use beyond training was self-evident. And that's not true. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Last, I'll say that underlying a typical implementation is the fact that when you implement this system, it's going to affect other work. Okay? We don't just implement the system and everything else happens the same. Okay, so I go to training on this. What would I have been doing otherwise? Lesson plans, talking to a parent. I sit down to use the system. What did that replace? It's a zero-sum game, right? I would have been doing something else. And if we haven't accounted for that, or if we haven't figured out how to work that in to what we were doing, then we have problems. And we see that often in a typical implementation. So I want to use that as a springboard to move on to the part where we talk about the human side of data system implementation. Let's talk about the people. We've talked about all of the technical part, but what we are here to talk about today is how we can account for the people, the human side, the socially based part of implementation. So what I'm going to do in this part is I'm going to give you the basis for our implementation plan. You know, we're all working up to this implementation plan here. And I'm going to talk some about the basis for it. I'll give you the characteristics that go into a plan, things that you need to worry about, what the research says. But I'm also going to talk about that in detail during the plan itself. So you're going to get it in both places. Here are some things to consider. First of all, in an article that Vincent Cho and I recently had published in Teachers College Record, Vin wrote this great sentence, this great phrase that I love, that data system implementation is an extended period of social adjustment. What that means is that you don't just stop it when you roll it out. In fact, you are just getting started then. You're like Al Pacino in Son of a Woman, right? I'm just getting started. And that's when the fun begins, because that's when we get to talk about the work. That's when we really get to take this shiny new tool that we're also excited about, and we get to talk about how we're going to work with it. And so here's what happens. If you're going to account for the people side of it, then you're going to look at your implementation as something that, once it gets rolled out, is going to continue on through this process that people are going to be going through, where they think through how they're going to use this system. And, as the bullet says here, it's not just that they're thinking about how they're going to use the system, they're thinking about why they are going to use the system. What good will this do me? What else could I be doing? Why would I do this? And they're thinking about, ultimately, whether they are going to use the system. Okay? You need to work with them on that. The ideas that planners have about how this system will support people's work will be different from what the users have. It's a good thing to plan this out. Planners have to plan out an implementation and imagine what sorts of uses people are going to need, right? But just understand that while some of these will come true, some of them won't. And what the implementation literature tells us, what the ed tech literature tells us, and what the organizational literature tells us, is that that people are going to find their own ways to use these things. They're going to have ideas that are different from planners' ideas. The truth is that they're going to have to adjust to this new way of doing things. And so you need to be right there with them as they are adjusting to those. You need to be hearing what they're saying. You need to be adjusting your implementation accordingly. I'll tell you an anecdote. I'm not actually even sure that this happened, but I read about it once. And being anything true, I guess, isn't really a requirement for this anecdote, but it's a good one, and it makes a good point. I read once that a college built a new area of their college, whole new set of grounds, new buildings and all this stuff, and they didn't put in sidewalks. What they did is they put in grass everywhere, and they just waited to see where the paths were created. You know, we all see this where the sidewalk goes at a right angle, and then there's the path that goes at a 45-degree angle where people are cutting off that right angle. And what they did is they let it go for a year or two, watched where the paths were created, and that's where they put the sidewalks. Like I say, I don't know if that actually happened or not, but it's the sort of metaphor that we need for a data system implementation, right? You need to plan it. You need to know where to put the buildings. You need to know where to have things, but you also need to see where people are walking. And you need to see what sort of sense they make of this system. And you need to be with them when they're deciding how they're going to use it and really whether they're going to use it. So let's talk about the specific forms of support that you can provide for them as they are constructing these notions. First of all, this article that I talked about that Vincent Cho and I recently had published had a really interesting finding, and that is that educators' notions of data use determine what they see in the system and how they use it. What that means is that the educators who are using the system, they have their own ideas about how those ideas are what they look for in the system. Now, the nice thing that we also found is that these notions are these notions are, what's the word I'm looking for? Not controlled. These notions are supported by district messages and leadership messages about what uses of data are important and what constitute data for our work. It's not that they're controlled by it, it's that they're supported by that and remarkably influenced. So in terms of using a data system, or in terms of implementing a data system, you have to account for that people have their own ideas, but you also want to support these ideas, and you want to make sure that you know what your context is about and that your people know what your context is about. You know, how you work, what sorts of information you're going to need to support that work. I'll also note some work that JoBeth Jimerson and I have done on data-related professional learning. Those two articles will be coming out soon. Look, the work that we did there isn't surprising, right? I mean, you guys are all educators. You know this, that you provide professional learning in small ways, in relevant ways, and things that are immediately useful to your practice. But the thing that is surprising is it never happens that way. Okay, so as you're thinking about helping people learn how to use this system to support their work, don't be thinking about big, giant convocations. Go small, go relevant, go immediately useful. When you do this, focus on the data, not the system. Don't show them how to use the system. I'll talk about this a little more now, or a little more down the line. Focus on the work that we need to do. In the plan about how to teach them on the data themselves. All of this comes together to say that you need to support people's understandings of the system, you need to celebrate those, and you need to help shape how people understand the system. Just throwing it out to them and saying, okay, it's clear how you use this, is going to send everybody all in 15 million different directions. Okay? You need to help them get through this. In doing so, you need to create a feedback loop. And my plan has a feedback loop in it that I think you'll find interesting. But you need to provide ways to where you can listen to what people are saying. And you can listen and understand. You need to be able to sit there with them while they're using these things and understand how they're working with them. In short, you go back to that sidewalk anecdote. If you're going to support this, you need to help them build their sidewalks. Be there with them as they do this. So that's the short version of the socially based intervention. here in a little bit, we're going to see the implementation plan that we've crafted, and we'll indicate during that plan where these things pop up. Research told us that these characteristics were important. What I have for you is a plan that draws on these characteristics and one that you can use to implement a data system in your own context. But first, let's do another chat pod. We're going to do this just like we did before. There's going to be a poll there, and I'd like for you to vote in that poll. This one's a little different. It's got more options. It's going to ask you how the approach to data system implementation that I just described sounds to you. Does it sound cool? Hard? Scary? Exciting? Not workable at all? Very workable? Doable? You'll see some choices there, and I'd like you to weigh in. And like before, we'll leave that up for a little bit, and you'll see it changing in real time. Then it will disappear, and there will be 2 discussion pods that you can go into. There are 2 discussions that you can participate in. Participate in one or both of them. We want to know why you voted like you did, and whether you've done these sorts of things before, and how it's worked out for you. So we will, right now it is 2:50 Central Time. We'll reconvene here in about 6 or 7 minutes and get started again. We'll probably reconvene at about 2:57, 2:58 Central Time. So have fun with it. Okay, everybody, I'm back, and I hope nobody left. Because the next part is pretty cool here. So here are the results of the poll. I think you guys saw them before, and looks like a lot of people think it's simultaneously sensible and necessary, but also hard and exciting. So that's pretty good stuff. I'll respond to a couple of things that I saw here. In both of these discussions, there was first of all, there were some really good resources mentioned. Michael mentioned his dashboard, which I've seen, and it's pretty cool. The REL Pacific publication that my friend Wendy Kikuhio did is also really good. So I like that you guys are exchanging these resources among each other. Keep up that good work. One of the things that I took from watching your discussion here is buy-in and making it make sense to people. And I'll tell you that that it's, while teachers are the most resistant group to using data, they are also my easiest sell, because all I have to do is start talking to them about how they're going to know more about their kids and how that they can respond to and they start listening. Now, as you guys talked about on your chat pod with discussions about buy-in, you've got to be able to show them that this is going to work, because teachers are a very pragmatic group. They have their meters very high on this because they've seen stuff come down the pipe before. We're always going to make things better for them, and often we don't. And so what I'm going to talk about now in terms of a rollout plan, I think responds to those things. It incorporates the ideas that we talked about before, those characteristics that we talked about from research. And as I discuss this implementation plan, I'll note where those characteristics show up. So let's get to the overview. I'll note also that there is a handout that you'll see, which is a thing that you could actually give to somebody in a district and say, hey, here's what a rollout plan looks like. We'll look at that later on. I mean, you can look at it now, if you want to take notes on it or something, have it up in a Word document, you can. But I'm going to talk about the stuff that's in there. There's not much new in there. So just so you know that handout is there. The overview of this is that this plan that I have, this rollout plan, focuses on the work. It does not focus on the system. In fact, what you're going to see here is very, very little actually system-based. In fact, I'm guessing that unless you told them that most people who are involved in this implementation plan would never have an idea that they were getting a data system implemented to them. That's because we're focusing on the work, because the data system is a tool to support the work, not vice versa. As we do this, what this is based on is small practice-based doses or problems. I'm going to describe how we roll out the data system by specifying a problem that's relevant to everybody's practice, and they work on it, and then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And eventually they are familiar with this data system, and they've gotten some good work done. This particular example is one that I've written up to involve principals and their core teams. You actually have some flexibility on this. I would do it first with principals and their core teams, like a couple or three people that they trust there, because of the situations the principal's in. First of all, many of you have heard me say that data use lives and dies in the principal's office, but principals are in kind of this funky situation where they have the same amount of training on this that teachers did, which is often nothing, and yet they are the ones that are expected to lead teachers. Okay, so I am always, when I work with districts on this, I'm always sensitive to try to improve principals' leadership strategies for using data and try to get the principals up to speed first so that they can then turn around and lead their faculty. Not only does it make sense organizationally in terms of the leader knowing what they're doing, but it's considerate to the principals. Because it's hard as a leader to to save face while you're learning something at the same time that your people are too. So anyway, this one involves principals and their core teams. You have some flexibility on who you involve in it at first. The 4 steps to this rollout are the following. We're going to talk about each of the 4 in a separate slide. You start out, you specify a problem to these teams. Then you teach them about the data that they're going to have to use. Then you send them away to explore the problem. Then you bring them back to share what they learned. And then you do it again, new problem. Then you do it again, and so on. So let's get started and let's hear how this thing goes. First step is you specify a problem. Now this is this idea that I have for this rollout is actually inspired by something that I saw happen in Mesa. My friend Joe O'Reilly there had the Acuity data system that they were wanting to boost use and boost understanding of the system. And so what he did is he sent a what we kind of informally call a homework problem out to the principals. Said, here, why don't you do this using the Acuity data system? Well, of course, many of the principals looked at it and they said, you know, I need help with it. What this ended up being was a socially based intervention for those principals who took this approach. And so that was kind of the inspiration for the problem. That's what got us to thinking about it in this way first, because it matched with what the research said. So, like Joe did, the implementation planners, so you pick a problem that everybody's going to work on. Maybe it's a short menu of problems, but something that you specify that's something that is actionable, so something that whenever they do this problem, they will get something out of it. It's immediately relevant, so it's something that they are facing that day, that week, that month, something that doesn't take them long to do, that they can work on it in 1 or 2 weeks. I mean, we know the research about short cycle things, and you celebrate it and you move on to the next one. Something that they think is interesting and challenging. And here's the big one. It's about something that they don't already know. I can't tell you how many times that educators tell me, well, I'm expected to do this type of data use, but I already know the answers to this. So in short, those first 4 bullets say, specify a problem that's going to do people some good, that they can look at and go, oh yeah, working on this will be a benefit for me. Somebody in the chat pod mentioned doing this as a way to where it's not extra work for people. And so I'm looking at doing this in a way that it's different work for people maybe, but something that still fits into what they were needing to do, and so it's not that much extra work. Here are a couple of keys to this problem. One is that you need to use a very small number of data elements. Don't make the problem big. I'm talking 1 data element, maybe 2, maybe 3 at the most, but make it very, very small in terms of the number of data elements that you're going to use. And here's the big one. You have to specify a problem that can only be solved by using the data system that you're looking to implement. Why is that? Well, let's say that your district has an assessment system that they've been fond of, but all it does is just these little math assessments. Okay, if you specify a problem that is about math assessments, people aren't going to use your brand new shiny data warehouse. They're going to go to that same math assessment system that they've already been doing. So specify a problem that makes them use this new system, but also something that shows them the system as a beneficial thing. If you do this right, they are glad that you gave them this system to do this problem. Step 2, once you specify the problem, so I imagine that you got all your core teams in a room and you told them this problem, here's what we want you to do, and we want you to go work on it for a couple of weeks. But first, we are going to teach you everything about these particular pieces of data that you'll be using. We ask you to use 1, 2, or maybe 3 forms of data. We're going to give you training on what these data mean, what good you can get out of them, what you can do with them, what you can't do with them. So as an example, let's use a state test as an example. If you've asked them to do something with your state achievement test, talk to them about these things. What's a raw score? What's a scale score? What can I do with those? What about group comparisons? Which ones are valid? Is it okay to compare my 738 African American students to my 2 American Indian students and say something about the 2 ethnicities? Things like that. You may have people that say, yeah, I know all about these. Include them anyway. Review never hurts anybody. And everybody can always learn something new. Now, by doing this is critical. I can't impress on you how important this is to give them this expertise, to drop this knowledge on them, because what we'll be doing is making them confident in their ability to work with the data. You'll be making them capable to work with these data, and when they have to turn around and work with them, it's not a thing like in your statistics class or your algebra class where you're like, yeah, I learned it long enough to know how to do it on the test, but now I couldn't do it to save my life. No, they're going to turn around and work with these things, and these are things that they're going to have to be conversant about in everyday life. And so you've built a little small community of experts here around these data points. And once you build that expertise, then people can build on that. It's what we know as capacity building, right? So that's step 2. Step 3 is they've learned their problem, or they've gotten their problem. They have learned about the data elements. Now you send them away to solve the problem, okay? Now, as you do this, on the way out, if we're imagining our kind of metaphorical meeting, on the way out the door, you say, oh, by the way, you're going to need these data. Here's a little leaflet that gives you a 4-step process how to get them out of this new data system. And that's the only thing you say about the data system. The system implementation plan here that actually says very little about the data system. Again, that's because the data system's supporting the work. And I'll be honest with you, we care about the data system because we built it and we bought it and we lived it for 2 years, and it's really, really cool. Disappointingly, nobody else cares as much as we do about our shiny new data system. What they care is the reason that they signed up to teach or be a principal for in the first place, which is to get this work done, and the only thing they care about that system for is how it helps them do their work. And so as they sat there with a funny feeling in their stomach thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to scrape together these data from this system and that system and so on, you come in and save their life and say, oh, by the way, we have this new data system. All you have to do, here's your username, here's your password, you click here, 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 and here, and you get your data. And then you can move on to solving the problem. Remember, we're going to repeat this a bunch of times. So you do this enough, and people will begin to get familiar with this data system. But, my gosh, you don't make them familiar with it all at once, right? So anyway, the teams now go and they work together to solve the problem. They use those instructions that I talked about to access only the data they need. You haven't taught them anything else about the system other than this, because they don't need anything else. And in the end, they produce a written product. This written product, I would recommend giving them a rubric or some sort of form to fill out, or however you want to do it, but give them some guidance on what the written product should look like so that you get something returned that is what you were imagining. I have some examples here of things that could be on there, but when they create their written product or their presentation, maybe they have to list the data elements they used, the results that they found, the conclusions that they drew. So that's looking at it and saying, okay, we saw these data and they meant this to us, and now what we're going to do in our context as a result of that. This step takes into account a lot of the things that we talked about before. It takes into account the collaboration, for instance. Now, I wish I'd have talked a little more earlier about the importance of collaboration and what organizational research has told us about that in terms of information sharing. But what's happening while they're exploring this problem together is they're setting up conduits for information flow. That's organizational talk. But what they are doing is they're discussing this problem. They're working on it together, and they are establishing what Sengi calls shared mental models about teaching, about learning, and about how data serve these. They're drawing shared meaning from these things. They may not 100% agree on everything, but that's okay. If you and I are working together on this, I understand now where you're coming from, and you understand where I'm coming from. And while they may be a little bit different, there's probably a fair amount of overlap that we have. The element where they create a written product, in the next step, I'll talk about how that works to deal with information flow between schools. So I guess let's go ahead and move on to that right now. So in step 4, now they've done their work. It's been 1 or 2 weeks, and they come back to share what they did. So everybody comes back and presents their finished products, whatever those are. There are a lot of ways that you can do this. You know, you could have them give presentations in a monthly principal meeting. You could use Doug Reeves' idea of an adult science fair, you know, where you put them in the multi-purpose room and everybody's got a poster presentation. But what you're aiming for here is the type of information flow that the organizational people say is so critical to an organization. You've worked on information flow within the school unit, right? So within these little collaborative teams. Now you're going to work on information flow between the schools, and that does not happen very often in districts. And so people will learn a lot about the various approaches that that different schools took to this problem. Each school will take an approach that is relevant to their context, and this is the sort of thing that I was talking about earlier that you need to be watching. These are the sidewalks that people are building, because, yeah, maybe I'm in a school that's got 9% free lunch, right? Yeah, I can learn from how this other school that looks exactly like my school did things, but I can also learn from the school that's got 99% free lunch, and I can learn how they're doing things, and they can learn how I'm doing things, and we can pick up all sorts of different ideas. And sometime down the line, I'm going to be sitting there in my principal's office, and a parent's going to walk in and ask me a question. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I remember somebody from school X talking about that sort of thing. Let me get back to you on that. So if we talk about benefits from reconvening here, one of the main benefits is it shares information about data practices. This is what we were just talking about. It also produces, by reconvening, it also produces a social accountability for finishing this product. And I've written an earlier work about the importance of this accountability. I called it positive peer pressure at the time, and we all need that. If we just say, go do this problem and think about it on your own, it might or it might not get done, and it may or may not get done in good fashion. But here's the big deal. If I don't have to articulate to you what sorts of answers I came up with, then I don't have to check my thinking. I don't have to make sure that it makes sense to anybody outside of my own skull. And these are very, very important things. These are the checks and balances that Sengi talks about, and why it's so important to have this conversation with each other. The third thing, you talk about building sidewalks. If you're the implementation team, you have to listen to these presentations. You have to listen how people were working. You have to listen what sorts of problems they found with the systems. You have to listen to which things they thought were exciting. Because you have your implementation planned out, but one of the things you knew from our earlier slides is that it's going to change somehow. You're going to find things in here that you're like, oh, we need to adapt this a little bit. The people are working together in these ways. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Okay, now I understand what people meant when they were giving me this feedback through the data system. And you can adjust your implementation plan accordingly. This is part of the extended period of social adjustment that Vin and I wrote about. And it's really, really important. So some of this feedback that you're going to collect during this step is going to be formal. You know, you may have them fill things out. You may have somebody taking notes about things that they heard. So codify it, make sure that some of it's formal, but don't forget about management by walking around. You know, there are, to use the metaphor, there are water cooler conversations that are going to be going on in these reconvenings that you need to hear. And these will all be very helpful. So those are the 4 steps that I recommend. Let's talk about next steps. And as I was reviewing my slides this morning, I don't like this slide as well as I do the others, so I'm going to go a little bit off the menu here. Some of these, as you look, some of these are next steps and some of them aren't. So, so we'll talk about this in terms of next steps first. You're not done with this, right? I mean, if you imagine doing this implementation, this 4-step implementation, then going, hey, we're done, the data system implementation is done, then you're just doing the same thing that typical implementations do. In some sense, this work is never done, but the fact is that this is designed to be done again and again and again. So at the end of that convening, whenever everybody comes back and says, here's what we did, you tell them, all right, here's your next problem. And we'll meet again next month. You got 2 weeks. Come back, we'll teach you about the data. You go work on it, and we'll reconvene again. And then you do it again, and again, and again, and again. Also, during these next steps, you need to be looking for ways and opportunities to give this back to the people that you're working with. Initially, you're a planner, right? But remember, we talked about that the problem with many implementations is that it's implemented as though the planners had the right answers. You recognize now that you don't have all the right answers, that the right answers, right, or in quotes, if you can put your own air quotes there, the right answers are ones that develop. They're the ones along the sidewalks that we're helping them build. And so you want to try to hand over responsibility as it makes sense. So at some point, they're going to be providing you input on the sorts of problems that you are going to need to be, that you're going to work on down the line. Maybe at some point you turn the problems over to them entirely. You pick a problem and come back when we reconvene. You're going to have to help them figure out how they're going to go from small teams to working with their entire faculty. It's not one step, of course, but the aim of this is eventually to roll this out to all the faculty. And this process is going to be happening with their full faculty at some point. It may take a year or two, but at some point, everybody needs to do this. And so you want to work with them on how to make sure that happens. So if we look back, what have we accomplished? We have created an implementation plan that is work-based, not technological-based. We've created an implementation plan that looks to the people looks to the educators, looks to the humans in this as the agents of change. We've created something that we hope is relevant to their work. We sure tried, and since we're listening, since there are feedback loops, as the organizational people tell us, we're going to know it if this isn't relevant to their work. And the reason why we worry so much about creating things that are relevant to their work is we want to introduce this data system not as an but as something that they want to put in to their everyday life. These people are going to gain expertise by using the system, right? But you only use it for what you need. Yeah, you can go to some place and take classes on how to use your smartphone, but nobody learns it that way. You learn using your smartphone because you're like, oh, I got to figure out how to get a map because I got to get down to Seattle to do this webinar. Where's the map thing? And oh, I found it. Good. Maybe you ask somebody. That's how we're going to learn our data system. And it's not any extra work for me to use my phone because I use it in the course of my everyday life. And we want to make this data system the same way. Finally, I'll make 2 notes here off of this slide that are really important. One is that that we have helped them build work routines around the system. They're going to work differently because of this. I don't know exactly how, and neither do you, but they are going to work differently, and we hopefully help them build work routines that fit them really well. Finally, I'll say that this problem solving, you remember earlier I told you that educators' notions around data and data use are heavily influenced by district messages. That's not a good thing if the district just decides and tells them what it is, because then you're acting off somebody else's script. Instead, this consistent problem solving is a way for district planners and district leaders to let people know what they believe are important about data and data use, and it provides a cycle of feedback to where planners can also hear what people think are important. So I want to address one more thing here, and that is what happens if you can't do something that's gigantic, right? Okay, so if you're sitting here listening to it, you may have been sitting there going, this is huge. You're talking a year-long thing. You think I can get everybody in my district to buy into this? Well, maybe you can. There are some people in context to where you can do that. Maybe you can't. I don't know. I wanted to give a large-scale implementation so that we could illustrate all of the characteristics. I'll tell you, this implementation plan is going to work, but it's only going to work if your district is ready for it, right? You may be sitting there feeling like the lone wolf. You may be sitting there going, I'm the only person in my district that cares about this. Or you work for a university, and you're like, I just talk to superintendents every now and then. At the end of your handout, whenever you look at that handout, there is a final page on there, or maybe it's 2 pages, that says essentially, okay, if you choose not to, or if you cannot implement this particular plan, it's just one plan. It's just one example. There are a million plans you could go with. Just make sure that you hit as many of these characteristics as you can. You may not be able to do them all at once, but if you pick them off one at a time, if you say, I'm going to pay attention to this, you will be more successful than if you had done it the other way. So at this point, I am going to let you know one last thing, which is that I am easy to find. Track me down. If you've got further questions, if you've got comments, if you want to work on this together, let me know. Email me. I'm always happy to have conversations. Those are always fun. I work as a consultant now, but I'm also working on cloning myself into 15,000 guys so that I can go to 15,000 districts and do all this. Not making much progress on that cloning yet, but I sure like doing this work. And I think it's important work because, like I said, when Vincent and I published these 2 articles here, we don't see anywhere else where people are talking about data systems like this, and I think it's critical. One last thing I'll alert you to, the 3rd bullet down there is my Facebook site. So I've got my website, which does things, but we also have a good discussion over on Facebook. So if you're a Facebook user, go look at my page, participate in the discussion. Don't wait for me to say something. Write something on our wall if you want to, and let's keep the conversation going. So anyway, thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wayman, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. We also appreciate all the technical support from our staff and for Heidi and Janice for being here, for responding to the chat pods. And we do invite you to follow REL Southwest on Twitter also. We recently joined Twitter. And then we do ask you to complete the stakeholder feedback survey. And I can open that right now, and you are able to complete the survey immediately after the webinar. And again, we do thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.